Hey guys, welcome back to the Speaker's Edge podcast, the podcast dedicated to helping you learn from some of the world's very best speakers so that you can master your message and inspire your audience every single time you speak. I'm your host for this podcast, Roddy Galbraith. Delighted that you've chosen to join us today in this podcast. We're going to be talking about the importance of keeping the magic of the first time every time. Every time you speak, speaking like it's the first time you've said it, even if it's not. So we're going to look at how you can be consistently great, and that's the key, being consistently great every time you speak, creating a unique audience experience for your audience every time you speak. Now, don't forget to download the companion resources. You can go to maxwellleadership.com/the Speaker's Edge, and you'll be able to download those resources. And we'd love it if you rated or reviewed the show, liked it, downloaded it, subscribed, wherever you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, wherever you enjoy your podcast. We'd love it if you leave a comment or a rating. Thank you very much. All right, so why do we need to keep the magic of the first time, first of all, then? Why do we need to do this? Well, first of all, remember the great words of Bill Gove when he said, a pro is at their best regardless. A pro is at their best regardless. What does that mean? It means that no matter what happens, you've got to be at your best. You've got to deliver. The audience has paid for you, or at least they've paid with their time to hear you, and they deserve your very best. They deserve you to deliver the message or the promise that you've promised to them, to deliver on your promise. So you have to deliver if you're a professional. If you want to be paid like a professional, you need to be a professional. You can't be an amateur. I love the way Steve Seabold explains this. He says, if you want to be paid as a professional speaker, don't turn up with an amateur's performance. It's not going to work. So forget the idea of a natural speaker. You've got to work hard. It's not like some people are born able to add value to an audience and others aren't. Everyone that is able to add value to an audience works hard to get to that point. So forget the idea of a natural speaker. Remember, I think it was episode 1, I quoted Les Brown. He said, natural speaker, show me a natural heart surgeon. We understand that for a heart surgeon, they've worked very, very hard for a long period of time, don't we, in order to get to that point. Very, very hard. So natural speaker, show me a natural heart surgeon. No such thing as a natural heart surgeon. No such thing as a natural speaker either. Are some people more confident when they're speaking? Yes, but it's not about how you feel. It's about being able to add value to the audience, remember. So it's about adding value. And everyone that can consistently add value to an audience works hard to get to that point. So we're talking about why we need to keep the magic of the first time. But first of all, we're talking about your job. You've got to deliver. You've got to deliver. So how do we consistently deliver value to the audience then? Well, no matter what, no matter how you're feeling, whether you're sick, whether you'd rather go home and have a duvet day, or what do you call that in America? Or a comforter day? Doesn't really have the same ring to it, does it? You want a day off. You want to kind of pull the covers back over your head and cancel today. I'm sure we've all experienced that type of thing, haven't we? So sometimes we have that kind of feeling. But we've still got to go and deliver if we're a professional. You can't just kind of, oh, no, I'm not feeling it today, so I'm not coming in. If you're booked to go and speak to an audience, you've got to deliver for that audience. One of the questions I get asked a great deal is, how long should I prepare to give a 20-minute talk? How much time should I put into the preparation of a 20-minute talk? Because my time is precious. Time is the most precious resource for all of us, isn't it? That's true. And so how much of my time should I give this audience? Well, it's not really about how much of your time. We're not talking about your time. Remember, it's all about the audience. It's their time. And if there's 100 people in the audience, for every second that you're speaking, you're consuming 100 people seconds. For every minute that you're speaking, you're consuming 100 people minutes. For every hour that you're speaking, you're consuming 100 people hours, at least, because they've got to get there and transition and all the other things. And someone's paying them in all likelihood for that time. So even if you're giving your time for free, it's not free to whoever is paying these people. So it's not about your time so much, it's about how can you really honor their time? How can you treasure every precious second of the audience's time? You've got to make the best use of their time. So you're going to use your time to make the best use of their time. And that's as long as it takes, really, isn't it? Because you have to deliver, you have to add value to them. And so it's not a question of how much time you should spend, it's what do you need to do to get the job done? And it's not, remember, just you standing up confidently, enjoying yourself, talking about stuff, whatever kind of springs to mind. No, it's about adding value to the audience. It's about adding value to the audience. Now, I think it's important that we acknowledge right at the beginning, because obviously we're modeling John Maxwell a great deal, and other great speakers, Les Brown, Nick Vujicic, many others in this program. It's important to realize that when you get as good as them, when you look at John, when you look at some of the things he does, there's different rules that apply to John Maxwell, different rules. He's very, very good. He makes it work. If you sit and watch him, often he's slumped back in his bar stool. He's like chewing on a cough sweet a lot of the time. He's reading off his iPad. He says things that you probably shouldn't say on stage. He does things that you probably shouldn't say on stage. And he's probably the best speaker in the world because it works for him. He's got very, very good. So there's two kind of sets of rules, if you like. There's rules for people who are very, very good, and then they make up their own rules because whatever works and may not work for everyone. And there's everyone else who the same kinds of things tend to work for most people most of the time. And preparing to add value is a consistent approach. It's something that works. It's something that I've helped countless thousands of people with. It worked for them and it will work for you too. Making it up as we go along, speaking off the cuff, the idea of this natural speaker, the idea that there's some secret that you can get or you can buy, and then you'll just be able to make it up as you go along and add great value to the audience. It's just not true. It's a myth. Nonsense. Just forget that. Just forget that. I remember I did a program with Les Brown a number of years ago, several actually. And for one of those programs that we were preparing for, we had a conference call in the lead up to the event, and people were asking questions, and somebody jumped in the queue. We'd been talking about preparing and practicing for the event. Somebody jumped in the queue and said, Les, I just want to be able to speak off the cuff like you do. That's what really my goal. And I want to be able to nail it every time like you do. And Les just laughed. He's like, listen, nothing is off the cuff. Nothing is off the cuff. Everything is strategic. Everything is strategic. Now, the reason this is difficult for us to understand, I think, the reason often where we get stuck is Les Brown's one of the best extemporaneous speakers in the world. So we look at him, he can just pick up the mic and start talking. He's able to do that. But remember, different rules apply to people like Les Brown and John Maxwell. John Maxwell I interviewed similarly. In fact, 6 months after Les Brown, I interviewed John Maxwell at the International Maxwell Conference on stage in front of thousands of people. And before that, I said to John, I'd love it if during my session you could join me and do a bit of Q&A. I'll ask you some questions and, we can really add value to the audience. He's like, that's a great idea, Roddy. I love it. What are we going to do? And I said, well, similar to what I did with Les Brown 6 months ago, I'll bring you up. I'll say as little as possible. I'll try and set you up and you'll speak as much as possible. You'll tell a few stories, tell a few jokes and, and they'll love it. He says, no, it doesn't work like that. What do they need? Let's work out what they need and then we can provide that solution. We can provide the value for what it is that they need. Now, I've interviewed a lot of big names over the last 20 years, a lot. And John Maxwell stands out in every different capacity that you think about it. As a guest, he was exactly on time. Fantastic use of, I think it was like 6 or 7 questions. Every single one the audience loved. It was funny. It was heart-wrenching. It was incredibly useful. It's very insightful. Shared loads of great information. Bang on time. Left, went off. Audience loved him. It was the best one that I've done by far. All of the other speakers had slightly different approaches. John is a consummate professional. He's got a sickening work ethic. Even at 78, he's always had it. It doesn't seem to show any signs of evaporating or disappearing or weakening at all. He works very, very hard. Now, John could wing it more easily than anyone else, I think. He could stand up and he could wing it and save himself a lot of time. But he knows he's not at his best when he does that. He knows he's not at his best. And so he wants to deliver his best. So he wants to work hard to make sure that he does that. If you pay him $125,000, he'll come and give you his best. He'll work hard to make sure that the message is on point. If he's coming to speak for you for free, the same thing. Because he's a professional and he wants to deliver his best and he knows he's at his best when he prepares thoroughly to do that. I've worked with many pastors over the years, and I remember one group of pastors that I was working with, I taught a lesson about, consistently nailing it, even if your audience is changing every week, which makes for a lot of work for pastors. It's different to somebody that's speaking to a different audience every week where they can just use the same material. A pastor, very often, if they're lucky, they got the same people coming back every week. And so we were talking about this, and then this person joined the queue and they said, I'm a pastor and I enjoy sharing the word of God, and it's not about me. And I think for me to prepare is putting me in the message, and I want it to be less of me and more of God. I want God to use me and for it to come through me, and for me to just say what they need in that moment from God, not for me to try and prejudge what that should be. And it's very difficult to argue with that, isn't it? What do you say? No, that's wrong. That's the wrong approach. So I thought about it for a moment and I said, well, is it working? And he said, what do you mean? I said, how's this approach working for you? Are you getting the results that you want? And he said, well, no, not at all. I mean, it's not working at all. I'm like, well, maybe you need to try something else then. I don't disagree with what you're talking about, but the people that tend to be able to do that are people with enormous amounts of experience. They've done a lot of the hard work, first of all. Look at it this way. Imagine the piano. I think this is such a good example because most of us have tried to play the piano at some point and we've realized how hard it is. Remembering where the keys are, moving your hands, pedals, let alone reading music, let alone some kind of tune, trying to do all of these different things at the same time. It's incredibly difficult. So I said, imagine somebody sat in front of an audience and said, I'm going to play from the heart. I'm going to allow God to play through me on the piano tonight. How's that going to work? Well, we'd say, have you had a lot of experience playing the piano? And they're like, no, not really. Well, how much experience have you had? Well, none. I know the scales, I know where the notes are, but that's pretty much it. What are the chances that it's just going to come out really, really well? Pretty slim, I would think. We've got a part to play in that exchange. If you like that exchange of, being a pencil in the hand of God or being a tool for God to use, we've got to be the best tool that we can, surely. There's a lot of things that we need to develop to play the piano. Just like there's a lot of things that we need to develop to drive a car. A lot of that needs to be delegated to habit. And it's the same with speaking. There's a lot going on that we need to understand and then delegate to habit. So we don't need to think about everything. If we haven't done those things, then all of our thinking power goes to thinking about what we're going to say. And then everything else is on autopilot settings, which is probably slow and stuttering and stilted. And at best made for conversation, developed in conversation, not on stage when we're the one doing all the speaking and the audience is looking at us all the time. It's a different set of skills. And if we can develop that skill set, then it can really make a difference, really make a difference. I've worked with thousands and thousands of people over the last 20 years, helping them develop their speaking. I know I can teach people to get better at speaking. I know I can teach people, show people, lead them through feeling more confident about their speaking. I know I can teach people how to overcome common objections. I know I can teach them how to connect with an audience. I know I can teach them how to establish their credibility with that audience. And I know I can teach them to ask for the business, to make that call to action, to encourage their audience to take the action or think about the things they want them to think about at the end. I know I can do that by moving you through a process. I've seen countless examples of this. I've seen it work time and time again, but I don't know how to teach you to just make it up as you go along and do all of those things. I don't know how to teach you to just speak from the heart. And by that, we typically mean making it up as we go along, don't we? Waiting to be inspired and do all of those things for you to influence the audience in an ethical way. I don't think we can leave it to chance. I don't know how to do that. I don't know anyone that can do that. And I don't know if anyone can do that consistently unless they're in the Les Brown, John Maxwell, or at least a great deal of experience where they have a great deal of information internalized, ready to draw upon. People who can do those things, people who can speak extemporaneously, people who can just play a tune on the piano, they typically have been playing for years. And even then, John's example, he knows he's not at his best, even though he can do that. He knows that he's not at his best when he does that. And even if it is possible, even if it is possible, is it reliable? Is it reliable? Can we be consistent? A friend of mine who died a couple of years ago, sadly, he was about to be introduced to go up on stage in front of thousands of people. His phone rang while he was waiting. He looked at it. It was his mum. He took the call. And his mum told him that she'd been diagnosed with cancer. As he's being introduced to go up on stage. And he has to say, I'll call you back, Mum, and hang up and go on stage and deliver. And still deliver, because a pro is at their best regardless. He's got to deliver like a professional. No, it probably wasn't a 10 out of 10, but it was very good. Unless you'd seen that presentation once or twice, you wouldn't know it was any different. If you saw that for the first time, you'd say it was amazing. Remember, As Steve Siebold said, I quoted him earlier, you can't expect to be paid like a professional if you're going to turn up with an amateur performance. And you can't just turn up and say nothing. You can't say, oh, sorry, I'm not really feeling it today. And so, do you mind if we skip it? You've got to deliver. You've got to deliver. Now, there's all kinds of great quotes, isn't there, around this idea of preparation. I think the difficulty is not in buying into the idea that we need to prepare. It's accepting that it applies to speaking too. It's not the will to win. Everyone has that. It's the will to prepare to win that really makes a difference. That was Bear Bryant, wasn't it? It's this idea that if we're going to win, we've got to prepare. Musashi, the samurai, 400 years ago, he said we can only fight the way we train. We only fight the way we train. So we've got to train the way we expect to fight. It's the same with speaking. You can only present the way you prepare. You can only speak the way you practice. So if you're going to speak out loud, don't practice in your head. If you're going to speak words out loud, don't spend all your time crafting the perfect script on paper. It's not going to work. We can only play at the level of our practice. That was one of the great American coaches, wasn't it? Sports coaches. We can only play at the level of our practice. Who's the guy from Atomic Habits? James Clear. He said that we won't rise to the occasion. We're fall to the level of our systems. We're fall to the level of our habits. Well, I think for speaking, we can say, you'll do your best, of course, but your best isn't going to be good enough if you haven't done the work. So we won't rise to the occasion if it's beyond our abilities. We're fall to the level of our training. So if we want to rise to the occasion, we need to train to the occasion first of all. Anyone can do their best when everyone's watching, but if you haven't done the work, your best isn't going to be good enough. It's as simple as that, isn't it? So why do we need to prepare then? Hopefully, we'll come back to this actually in a number of different ways when we talk about, can I use notes? Do I have to memorize it? Etc., etc. Different lessons coming up. But for now, let's just look at some of the ideas we've touched on as to why I think it's a really good idea for you to prepare. Number one, if you prepare, if you give time to your message and your audience in advance in your delivery, you can do the research to make sure that your message is on point. So you can research in advance, number one. Number two, you can think in advance. You can move some of your ideas on. You consider them from other perspectives, from this particular audience's perspective, maybe. So number one, you can research in advance. Number two, you can think in advance. Number three, you can then prepare in advance. You don't want the first time you say something, in here it seems like a good idea. When it comes out, you see whether it actually is a good idea. And often it's not. It's much clearer in here than it is when it comes out. It needs work. So we can prepare in advance, then we can test in advance. Testing in advance is huge when you think about it. We can test our ideas and see if they work. See if it's as good an idea in somebody else's mind when we explain it to them as it was in ours. And if it doesn't work, we've got time to change it. And if it does work, great. Then we can test it somewhere else and test it somewhere else. And we can build up confidence in our solution. And then we can use it when the stakes are high, when we need to be at our best. So number one, we can research in advance. Number two, we can think in advance. Number three, we can prepare in advance. Number four, we can test in advance. And number five, we can experiment in advance. We can try different things unattached to whether they work or not, because we're experimenting, we're in training. It doesn't matter if they work or not. We can push the envelope and find some things that work better in the safety of the lab, if you like. So we can experiment in advance. And then by doing that, number six, we'll discover better ways of making our point or making it more memorable. We can do that in advance. So that number seven, we can grow in advance before we get there. The audience deserves us at our best, and we'll be at our best if we grow as much as we can before we get there. And growth incorporates everything, doesn't it? So we're talking about our thinking, better thinking. We're talking about our feelings, changing the way we feel. We're talking about our actions, maybe even symptoms in the body. We're talking about developing more skills, knowledge, and experience so that we can be at our very best when we get there on the day of the show. Now, incidentally, I've talked a little bit about the Maxwell Leadership Certified Team as we've gone through this message so far. If you're interested in being a speaker, a trainer, a coach, you want to learn more about leadership, teaching John's great material, or if you just want to help in your career, to develop your career, to get a promotion or maybe a pay rise, to leave and get a better job, the Maxwell Leadership Certified Team can really help with all of those things. So why not check it out? I've been working on the Maxwell Leadership Team with John and Mark and Chris and the team, since 2010 is when I first got involved, working on the first speaking curriculum. I've been working with John on the Maxwell method of speaking for years and years and years now. There's nearly 60,000 coaches worldwide in 160 different countries around the world. The Maxwell Leadership Certified Team is immense. I can't explain it to you now. I can recommend that you speak to someone that can, though. But I can say, if you're interested in developing your speaking, there's nowhere better to go. There's no one better to model than John. The Maxwell method of speaking is 50, 60 years of John's very intentional growth as a speaker, distilled down into a system that you can use. The best place to learn that is in the Maxwell Leadership Certified Team. So why not fill out the form? You'll see the link on the screen or in the show notes, and book a call with the program advisor. They can explain the program to you. It's no obligation, as I said. It could be the best decision you've ever made. As I said, there's nothing like this if you're interested in developing your speaking. So I highly recommend that you check it out. And if it's not for you, it's just cost you a few moments of your time. All right. So let's move on now to the next piece, which is understanding the problem with everything I've said. It's a great idea to prepare. It's a great idea to be over-prepared. It's a great idea to work hard to add value to your audience. But there's a problem with this, and it's a big problem, a big problem. A number of years ago, some Maxwell Leadership Certified Team members were chatting to me at an event, and they were talking about how much they'd enjoyed this particular comedian they'd seen a week or two before. And so they were in New York and they saw this comedian advertised, and so they went to see him, and they said that it was unbelievable. It was so good. It was such a great experience. He was just jumping in and out with the crowd. He was like speaking off the cuff and talking to all these people and sharing these incredible stories. It was just like magical to watch. Absolute genius that he was able to do that. And then they said, we enjoyed it so much, we saw that he was like 20 miles down the coast. He was speaking the next night. So we thought, we've got to go and see him again. We've got to go and see him again. So they went down and went to see him. They went in and sat there. And within the first minute, they realized it was exactly the same set that he'd done the night before. Exactly the same. All of the jokes, everything, all of the impromptu things, everything was exactly the same as they'd seen the night before. It was just different people, different names. You know, some of the details were changed, but everything else was exactly the same. And they were so disappointed. The magic was ruined. People don't want to see behind the curtain. And so it ruined it for them. It ruined it for them. So I am encouraging you to work very hard to be at your best, to be at your very best, to prepare, to over-prepare, to practice, to experiment, to discover the best ways of saying things, the best things to include, find out what works and what doesn't, so that you keep getting better and better and better. So I am encouraging you to work very hard so that your audience sees you at your best. But the audience must never know that you put that amount of work in. They must never know, because they want to believe it's just you being great. They want to believe it's you creating this special one-off experience for them. They don't want to think that you're reciting a memorized speech. That doesn't work at all. That kills rapport dead. So what do we need to do? What's the antidote to what I'm talking about there? We're going to do the preparation, but we want to avoid this pitfall. What do? Well, we've got to keep the magic of the first time every time. We've got to keep the magic of the first time every time. Every single time we speak, we've got to keep the magic of the first time. Every time we prepare, we've got to keep the magic of the first time. We don't want to be internalizing bad habits. So keep the magic of the first time every time, even when you're training, when you're experimenting. Don't rush through because you're short of time. Don't race through because you're sick to death of your own story. Keep the magic of the first time. Then it will be there for you in the future. John says there's no shame in using the same story again. If it's with a different audience particularly, then there's no shame in using your story again, but make it a little bit better each time. Think about it each time. Try and shape it for this particular audience, for this particular point. Make it a little better each time. And make sure you say it like you've never said it before. It needs to seem like you're just making it up as you go along. Now, you know you've got the reliability of sharing information that you know works, but you also need to make it sound like you've never said it before. It's still you. There's nothing inauthentic about this. People get this idea that, you know, I want to be authentic, and if I'm going to be authentic, I mustn't prepare because that's inauthentic. No, I think that's very authentic. It's very authentic to do your best to add value to the audience. It's still you, remember, but you on a good day. It's still you, but you at your best. So it's still integrous to do that. I think it's much more integrous than just making it up as you go along. There's a high likelihood that you're going to bomb if you do that. And that is not honoring your audience. That's not honoring your audience. So John breaks all the rules. He's in a different category. We're talking about the vast majority of other people and a process of developing your talk, your message, so that you can add value to your audience. Whether it's one person in front of you or a large group of people in front of you, whatever it is that you're talking about, if you work on it, think about it in advance, then you're going to be better. You're going to be better. Now, one of the things that comes up a great deal is people talk about ums and ahs and filler words, and they're somewhat vilified. And I think for a lot of people, they are very distracting. So I think the rule here is, in conversation, we do tend to and ah, but there's not too much of it. It's when we're fighting for time, when we're thinking or we're going in the wrong direction and we're just kind of correct ourselves. We do that in conversation. And so the type of intimacy that we're trying to create with our audience is that conversational intimacy. So having some of those imperfections of speech is not a bad thing, as long as they're not distracting. As long as they're not distracting. So we're not talking about memorizing a script and then delivering it word perfect. People don't talk like that. That doesn't work. It doesn't feel right. It feels off to the audience when they can't quite put their finger on it, or they think you're just reciting something you've memorized. That's insulting to the audience. It definitely kills rapport, and it might be irritating for them as well. So we don't want to do that. I'm not talking about memorizing a script and reciting it. You can do that if you want to. If it's helpful for you to do that, if it's helpful for you to script it all out in advance and then learn it, then recite it, then you still need to go through the process of making it sound like you're making it up as you go along. But you'll be very tied to that script. It's very fragile, actually. I wouldn't recommend that. We don't want the audience to think anything else other than this is just us being us. It's like when you watch a good film. If you watch a good film where the acting is really good, you don't even think of them as actors, do you? You see them in that role. You're sold as them in that character. It never enters our mind that they're acting unless it's bad acting. And then we're like, this is bad acting. They're not very good at this. So we don't want the audience to feel like we're reciting something that we've prepared. We don't want that. We want the audience to feel like it's just us being us, sharing this great information with them. But for us to be at our best, we need to have thought about that a great deal before. We need to have shaped that message a great deal before. Give you another example, again, with the actor Michael Caine. Many of you will have heard of Michael Caine. He married, I think it was Shakira. He talks about it in his biography about marrying this lady Shakira. I believe he's still married to. Susan shared an article that she'd written about him a couple of years back, and she said life with Michael is knowing that no matter what you're doing, he is reciting the lines for his next film in his mind. All the time. If we're on vacation and we're walking down the beach holding hands, looking at the sea and chatting, I know that somewhere in there he's rehearsing the lines for his next film. It's just what he does. And he does it so that when he steps in front of the camera for the first time to shoot that scene, he's said those lines over 1,000 times each from every different perspective. He's thought about it from every different way so that he's internalized them. He's become the role, and then he's sharing it in front of the camera. Isn't that great? And when you see Michael Caine acting, and all great actors, we don't think that they're sharing lines. We think it's just, in fact, we're just lost in the story, aren't we? We're just swept along with the film. So forget the idea of reciting a script. We want to have much more flexibility than that, which is why I don't recommend that you have a script and you memorize it. I think it's better to work from bullet points personally. But either way, you want to work on the delivery as well, not just the words. You need to work on actually saying them. So where do we start then to work on keeping the magic of the first time every time? Well, I think it's a great idea to practice and experiment, but you need to keep the magic of the first time while you're practicing and experimenting. Then we internalize the magic of the first time. It becomes a habit. If we're rehearsing or discovering or preparing a message, keep the magic of the first time every time so that it becomes a part of you in lots of different ways. It's you drawing on information that you've thought about and experimented with perhaps, but it's coming out of you as if you're saying it for the first time. It's different from reciting something you've memorized. Cary Grant apparently said, "I acted like Cary Grant for so long, I became him." That's great, isn't it? Now remember, We talked about this a couple of episodes back. Connecting with your audience is your primary objective. It's your primary goal every time you're speaking, connecting with your audience. So a conversational delivery where the audience feel like they're getting to know you is a great way to do that. If they get to know you, then they can like you, then they can feel like, yeah, I trust you. I trust you. So connecting with the audience is our first job. So if you know your material well so that you're not tied to thinking about the words, but you can be yourself, your personality comes out. Again, you at your best, your personality comes out, and then the audience can connect with you. Then they can feel like they know, like, and trust you because it's you, but at your best. So they feel like they know you, then they can trust you. This is great for connection. If they feel like you're reciting a script, or you're really thinking about what you're saying, and so your personality is nowhere to be seen, it kills rapport dead. It doesn't work at all. So here's your cheat sheet then. How do we keep the magic of the first time? How do we kind of implement this? Well, 6 things that you can do that will make a big difference to keeping the magic of the first time. Remember, number 1, every time you speak, job number 1 is connecting with the audience. So we've got to keep that in mind. We need to connect with the audience. Number 2, a conversational delivery is a great way to do that. John Maxwell epitomizes this when he says, my name's John, I'm your friend. It's like he's talking just to us. We feel like we know him, we like him, and we trust him because of the way that he talks to us. So number 1, connecting is our first priority. Number 2, a conversational delivery is a great way to connect. Number 3, keeping some of the imperfections of conversation is a great way for it to seem conversational. We don't want it to be word perfect because no one talks like that. No one talks like that. So we need to keep some of the imperfections. But number 4, it can't be distracting. So connecting, conversational, keep the imperfections, make sure it's not distracting. Number 5, our goal is to sound like this is special. It's a one-off just for them. So we want the imperfections of conversation, but without it being distracting in a conversational way. And then number 6, the best way I think to get there, script it all out if you have to, if you're comfortable doing that. But keep in mind a better way to do it once you get comfortable is just to put down some bullet points and then freestyle from those bullet points. And you'll gradually find different ways of saying the same thing. Some will be better than others, and you'll settle on the best way of saying it. Whether you start from a script or whether you start from bullets. The advantage of using bullets is you start speaking it out loud much sooner, which is really going to help you seem comfortable and confident in front of an audience. So one more time then. Number 1, connecting. Number 2, make it conversational. Number 3, keep the imperfections. Number 4, make sure it's not distracting. Number 5, our goal is to make it sound like this is a one-off. It's special just for them. So we want it to be imperfect, but not distracting and conversational. And number 6, I think the best way to get there is jot down some bullets and just start practicing out loud before you think you're ready. That's it for this week. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to download our companion guide, maxwellleadership.com/The Speaker's Edge, if you want to do that. Remember, communication, in my humble opinion, is the most important skill you can develop, and it is a learnable skill. So keep learning so that you can learn to master your message and inspire your audience every single time you speak. Thanks for listening today. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Lots of love. Take care. Bye-bye.